Welcome everyone into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Friday, June 14th, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about the Big 12. They're looking for some extra revenue with that gap between them and the Big 10 and Big 12 and SEC, growing even more, and they're looking for that maybe through private equity or maybe through selling their naming rights. So we'll get into all of that today. Then we'll get into a little bit of a past trend around some of the title champions from the past decade or so that Ohio State is not following. So I'll get into that and how it could spell doom for the Buckeyes this upcoming season. Then we'll get into the Big Ten. We'll get into two coordinators in the Big Ten, Tim Lester and DeAnton Lynn, two very, very important people that could totally shape the conference this upcoming year. So I want to break down them for 1 second and how they could have a huge effect on their teams. Then we'll get into some Group of 5 Cinderellas. We've been through all of the Power 4 conferences. Now we'll get to some Group of 5 teams that I'm watching especially closely. And then we'll finish it off with some Tommy's guys of 2024. I'm going to give you some guys that I'm watching very, very closely going into this season that I really expect to kind of blow up this season. So we'll get into that at the end of the show. But before we start, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to kind of have a fun, interactive experience here, and I think that's always fun for the both of us. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump right in and let's start talking about this Big 12 private equity deal that could be going down here pretty soon, and it's definitely a very interesting one. We've talked about kind of the gap that has been forming between the SEC, the Big 10, and the Big 12 and the ACC. And the ACC and Big 12 have obviously been looking for different ways to kind of close that gap, and the Big 12 just, I believe yesterday was when this was broke, that they're looking in the direction of private equity possibly for the future of their conference, for just kind of closing that gap a little bit. And they're looking in the way of CVC Capital Partners, a company that has a lot of investments in different professional leagues around the world, in the world of sports, and it's about going to be around $800 million to $1 billion for 15 to 20% of the Big 12 moving forward, which would be quite the thing. It's the first time that has happened. It definitely would be a very interesting thing to watch and has a lot of implications for college football and for college sports overall, to be totally honest with you. So it's going to be really fascinating to watch this. CVC is a very, very huge private equity company. They hold about $200 billion in investments around the world, and a lot of different ones within the world of sports, all professional teams at this point. So this would be the first time they're getting into the college sports world, and it would be very interesting to watch, definitely. The Big 12 is currently making about $31.7 million from their deals with Fox and ESPN, while the SEC and the Big 10 are making around 75. At least the Big 10 is making around 75 this upcoming year. So that gap is huge. There's no two ways about that, and you do have to close it somehow. But this is a really sketchy way to close it. I'll be totally honest with you. It's one of those things that I've been a little bit worried about as we've gotten kind of further down this road. The money part of it is going to be a huge conversation, and it kind of has to be in some of these athletic departments around the country, but this is a very dangerous proposition, and I think that's why there are a lot of Big 12 presidents that weren't necessarily too excited about this idea. There have been reports that they're pushing back pretty heavily on this, and I think it makes sense. There's going to be some things that happen from this that could be a little bit dangerous. And, you never really know what these investment groups are, looking for when they get into different kind of worlds like college sports. But the reality is they like to turn a little bit of a profit. That's just the way that these companies work. That's what they're made to do. So I think there could come a reality where the Big 12 is, rolling merrily along for a couple of years, and this seems like a very good partnership, and then they come to the table one day, and whoever's, the representative for CVC or whatever that looks like is going to come into that room and say, volleyball doesn't make quite enough money. Maybe we should move on from volleyball and really push more resources towards football and basketball, because that's probably the good business decision, right? But that's not what college sports is about. College sports has always been about kind of spreading out opportunities and spreading out different resources to all of the teams you can. Obviously, a lot of it goes towards football and basketball. There's no secret about that. But the reality is there is I suppose there's a little bit of a beauty to college sports kind of foregoing some of the technical monetary gain they could make by keeping some of these sports alive. And that's kind of the goal of what college sports should be. And if you introduce an entirely new entity, especially in a time that is very weird and all over the place and no one really has a lot of answers, they're going to have a different way of doing things. And they might not care about the sport as much as some other people in that room do. And they might not understand the sport as much as some other people might. And that's a huge thing. It just has to be a huge part of this conversation where we can't, just invite people into the room because they have the money that you need. And I fully understand that's going to be a problem going forward. And the Big 12 does have to worry about that. And Brett Yormark does have to worry about that. And he is a businessman, if nothing else. So I don't necessarily think it's, an indictment on him or an indictment on the league overall. I just more think it's dangerous. I think you're putting your league, you're putting your conference in a position where you're adding voices to the room that don't fully understand what they're dealing with. Now, they could, understand it better than I'm giving them credit for, to be totally fair. They have been in sports for quite some time and fully understand what the world looks like, but college sports is really different than what professional sports is. And now the lines have kind of been blurred over the last couple of years, but the reality is there is a difference, and there needs to be people in that room that are making those decisions that understand what that difference is. And I'm not super confident that these private equity firms fully understand that. Now, I do think there are enough people in these rooms to where I think they'll be able to be forthright and say, this is not the right way to go, or, maybe this isn't the way that we want to do things, whatever that looks like. I do think there's enough of those people, but those people also don't write the checks all that often. So it's one of those conversations where I understand you're trying to get yourself out of a little bit of a hole, and you're trying to kind of limit the gap between you and the SEC and the Big Ten and everyone else around you. But the reality is you're doing it in a way that almost opens you up to way more negative impacts down the road, where, yeah, you're getting a big time cash infusion, and that is very, very helpful to what you're going to do in the next couple of years with all the bills that are going to be due in the next couple of years. But the reality is you still got to make that money back. You still have to make that money, and you're doing it by only getting 80% of what your conference brings in, because 20 is going to this company that just gave you a ton of money up front. And I promise you they would make their money back relatively quickly. The question is, would the Big 12 be able to make up the difference of what that 20% is? So all of this kind of push for this arms race, I suppose, around who has the most dollars and who has the biggest media deal and who has the best NIL collectives and whatever it is. All of that has kind of created this need for money, and this need for money at this very moment. Everyone needs it right now, and if they don't have it right now, they might not be able to compete in 5 years, in 10 years. So I think it's almost caused some people to, I don't want to say panic, but push things forward a little bit faster than they would want to. I think Brett Yormark fully understands what he's doing. He's a fantastic businessman. That's where he came from, kind of the world of sports media and television. And so he fully understands these conversations and what it takes to kind of deal with these and move forward. But the reality is this is a very dangerous thing you're playing with, where you have a very, very tumultuous time in college sports right now, and there's going to be some people that try to get in and try to make a quick buck or try to make some money off this crazy situation they have in front of them. But you have to make sure you're inviting the right people in the room. Not to say that CVC would not handle this, totally above board and be, a little bit more hands-off in the decision-making and that type of thing. I'm not necessarily saying they would be, totally in and messing everything up. But it's just to say you're adding more variables to the conversation. You're adding more people to the room that haven't been there in the past. And frankly, there's a reason that they haven't been there in the past. So it's one of those things that I think all of us have been a little bit worried about. There's tons of bills that are going to have to be paid over the next couple of months, over the next years, and you got to get that money somehow. And there's some interesting entities that are willing to give you that money, but want some things in return, like 20% of your league going forward, or some decision-making powers, or whatever it is. So it's one of those things that maybe it doesn't hurt, in the next year or so. Maybe it doesn't hurt in the next 2 years, but I think it could in 5 or 10 when kind of all of this stuff really starts to sit into place. And maybe, people want to be more competitive in football. Maybe people want to be more competitive in college basketball, and that comes at the expense of other sports. Or, maybe it comes at the expense of some of the academic resources that they put forward. So it's not ideal. I don't think this is something that a lot of people, frankly, within the Big 12 are too excited about, if I'm being totally honest. But I'm definitely not. I think college sports for the last little bit has been in a very, very weird state, and we officially made that big leap to kind of get a revenue sharing agreement in place, and I think that was a great leap to take. But it added a lot of more questions, and with questions, with confusion comes an ability to make some money in that process. So I just think we have to be very careful about the people that we invite into the sport, the people that we let have any remote say in the sport, because it could not be great. There are other private equity firms that are looking into this. Redbird Capital is a huge one. I believe Weatherford Capital is the other one. Drew Weatherford was a former Florida State quarterback that has been kind of leading the charge in this. So it's probably not going anywhere, if I'm being totally honest. It's not necessarily my favorite thing in the world. I think it's a very dangerous proposition, but also I do think if you have the right people in that room, if you have people that, value education and value the other sports and value what college sports is all about, I think you're going to be okay. It's just adding more voices to that room, and especially voices that aren't in college sports. It's a dangerous game, and I don't necessarily love it, but I think that's kind of the reality we're living in. Florida State's really looking into it. The ACC, I'm sure, is looking into it. So I don't really know what to do about it, if I'm being totally honest. I hope it doesn't, really affect the future of college sports and what they are, but you never really know. So it'll be really, really interesting to watch all of this unfold. I think the Big 12 has gotten some pushback from some presidents and some ADs, so maybe they don't go through with this, but they need the money to keep up somehow. So it'll be really interesting to see how this goes down, and it'll be really fascinating to see if it does go down, how it kind of affects these this league and these athletic programs going forward. But we'll take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Ohio State. We're going to talk about a trend that has happened with some championship teams in the past and how Ohio State is not necessarily following that trend. So for a season that a lot have dubbed championship or bust for the Buckeyes, might just be bust, but we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows with 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about private equity possibly getting into the Big 12, as well as maybe naming rights for the league, maybe the All-State 12 coming down the road, but don't necessarily love that by any means. But let's get into the second segment here. Let's talk about Ohio State. When we talk about, college football going into this year, the conversation usually starts with Ohio State and Georgia. I think those are the two teams kind of setting the pace for pretty much everyone else going into the season, and Ohio State and Georgia have been the two top bet teams, Ohio State being the most bet team to win the national title this upcoming year, and it seems like everything is in place for them to do that. They have an incredible roster, a really good coaching staff, a lot of things going for them, but they don't necessarily have a trend that has kind of formed over the last 10 years that they might need to win a national title. So let's get into this and start to break this down, because this is really interesting. One of the things that has kind of happened over the last little bit in college football is immense amounts of change every single year with rosters, with coaches, with everything in between. But one of the things that has kind of won you national championships throughout that time is consistency. The last 10 national title winners dating back to the college football playoff era, so starting in 2014 with Ohio State's last national title, you have to return at least 3 of the 4 between the head coach, the offensive coordinator, the defensive coordinator, and the quarterback. If you return 3 of those 4 guys, you're good to go. You're definitely in the national title conversation. Also, among that, the top 10 or the last 10 national title winners finished top 13 in the final rankings from the previous season. So kind of gives you an idea of the trends that are kind of being followed, and the teams that, follow it and don't follow it might have a better shot to win a national title. So Ryan Day obviously back as the head coach. Jim Knowles back as the defensive coordinator, but you do introduce a new face in Chip Kelly and Will Howard coming in as your starting quarterback. Those are 2 of the 4, so it doesn't necessarily fit the parameters of the past champions. They obviously were in the top 13 to end last year, so they fit there just fine, but don't necessarily fit this one. So I want to get into the teams that actually do fit this, the teams that just missed the cut that also fit the top 13 ranking, but also I want to get into the teams that didn't follow this in the past 26 years. I believe it's only 3 in the last 26 years. So let's get into this real quick, and let's start with the teams that have this, that are following this trend, and it starts with Georgia. They're returning absolutely everyone. Kirby Smart is back. Mike Bobo's back. Glenn Schumann's back, although they added Charvarius Robinson as a co-defensive coordinator. And then you have Carson Beck back at quarterback. Same thing with Texas. You have Steve Sarkisian, Kyle Flood at OC, Pete Kwiatkowski at defensive coordinator, and then Quinn Ewers at quarterback. And then Ole Miss is the last one that returns all 4. You have Lane Kiffin, obviously. You have Charlie Weiss Jr. You have Pete Golding at defensive coordinator, and then Jackson Dart at the quarterback position. So those are the 3 teams, that return all 4, which is an absolutely huge thing for them going into this season. But then you have a couple that return 3, and they're really, really good teams as well. Oregon is one of them. Diane Lanning obviously back. Will Stein obviously back. Tosh Lupoy back at defensive coordinator. Dylan Gabriel's the new face in this room, and he is the quarterback coming into the season. If you were to ask me, I don't think they took too big of a drop-off between him and Bo Nix. Maybe you won't have quite the same running ability, although Dylan Gabriel is not necessarily a slouch running the ball by any means. But then you have Missouri that returns 3 out of the 4. The only person they replace is Blake Baker at the defensive coordinator position. So Eli Drinkwitz obviously back. Kirby Moore has done a great job at offensive coordinator around there. And then you have Brady Cook at quarterback, which is absolutely huge for them. And then Florida State is kind of like Oregon. They return all of the coaches they need, but add DJ Uiagalelei as their new quarterback, filling in for Jordan Travis, from a year ago. But they still have Mike Norvell, still have Alex Atkins, one of my favorite coaches in the entire country, and then Adam Fuller as well. So they're going to be more than fine. These are the teams that follow this trend. All of these teams have a very good shot to win a national title. I think they're all in that mix. Missouri's the one that you might not necessarily put in this mix with the rest of this group, but it's going to be a really good team. They have every ability to make some noise. Frankly, I think they have the best offensive player in the entire country in Luther Burden, so I think they can do some really, really remarkable things up there in Columbia and maybe just take some people by surprise this upcoming year. But let's get to a couple of teams that just missed the cut, but also finished top 13 last year, so fit one criteria but don't fit the other, maybe the more important one, to be totally honest. But let's start with Ohio State. Obviously, we talked about it. Ryan Day is back. You have Chip Kelly coming in. He will be calling plays now. Probably a good thing for Ohio State in the long term, if I'm being honest. And then you have Jim Knowles back at defensive coordinator. Has done just an incredible job with that defense since he's showed up in Columbus. And then you have Will Howard coming in. Obviously, a very, very big topic of conversation. Can he do the things that you need him to do? It'll be really, really fascinating to watch that guy unfold, and if it really matters, because he could be, 2022 Will Howard, and they could tear people to pieces. So it might not matter. It might matter. Who knows? But Penn State also returns 2 out of the 4. They return their head coach and their quarterback. James Franklin's back. Drew Aller's back. But Andy Kotelnicki and Tom Allen at the coordinator positions might be the most important people in the Big Ten this upcoming year. If they hit, Penn State has everything they need to win a Big Ten title. but those guys absolutely have to hit the way that some guys in the past have not quite at those positions. But let's keep going down the list here. We have Alabama only returns 1 out of the 4. Obviously, the coaching staff turnover plays a huge part in that. You add Kalen DeBoer, Nick Sheridan, and Kane Womack at the head coach and coordinator positions, and then Jalen Milroe being back. I would argue it might be the most important person to be back is Jalen Milroe for that team, but it'll be really interesting to see how that new head coaching staff kind of finds their way in this new world. And then Oklahoma returns 1 out of the 4. Jackson Arnold obviously got that start at the end of the season, but is a new starter nonetheless. You have Brent Venables coming back, but then added Seth Luttrell as your offensive coordinator. Zach Alley's the new defensive coordinator around there, which is a hire I really like. I think he's going to be a really good coach in the next couple of years. And then you have LSU with 1 out of the 4. Again, the head coach being the one that stays the same. You have Joe Sloan and Cortez Hankton taking over as your OCs, Blake Baker as the defensive coordinator, and then Garrett Nussmeier, the guy that I'm so excited to watch. I am definitely a part of the Nuss bus. Cannot wait to see that guy get on the field. Michigan, I have at a 0.5 out of 4, although it is 0 out of 4 technically, but I think Sharon Moore still being on staff gives him at least half a point. But Sharon Moore moves up to the head coaching position, Kurt Campbell in at the offensive coordinator, Wink Martindale at defensive coordinator, and then obviously Alex Orji is the new quarterback around there. And then you have Washington, the team that, took everyone by surprise a year ago and then had everything change on them. You have Jed Fish in as the new head coach. You have a very, very talented young play caller. I am blanking on his first name. I very much apologize. Carroll is their offensive coordinator. And then you have Steve Belichick coming in from the Patriots to be their defensive coordinator, which will be a very interesting thing to watch. And then Will Rogers will likely be their quarterback this upcoming year. So a lot of change around the country. A couple of teams that are staying very, very much the same. Georgia, Ole Miss, and Texas are obviously hanging out. They have everyone coming back, but a couple of different changes in there. But I want to give you an idea of the teams that have kind of bucked this trend. There's 3 in the last 26 national title winners that have done this and kind of, made this trend irrelevant. And it's 3 just ridiculous teams. Miami in 2001, as we all know, is one of the greatest rosters that's ever been assembled in college football. Ken Dorsey was the only returner on this team at quarterback. Butch Davis had moved on, so Larry Coker, who was the OC before, was the head coach. They brought in a new OC, brought in a new defensive coordinator. So a lot of turnover, but when you have all the dudes that they had, it was going to be a really good proposition for you to get at least in that conversation for a national title. The 2007 LSU one was obviously a crazy one that many people didn't even expect until the last week of the season because of how crazy that year was. But they had Les Miles and Bo Pelini coming back for their 3rd season. Matt Flynn was a first-year starter, and then Gary Crowton was the defensive coordinator in his first year over there. And then Florida State in 2013. Jimbo Fisher was the only returner, but he was the OC and the head coach at that time. So technically returned 2 positions, but 1 guy. You brought in Jameis, obviously, as a first-year starter, just lit the world on fire. And then Jeremy Pruitt was coming in as his first year as defensive coordinator. So those are the teams that kind of buck this trend. 3 just incredible teams, obviously, but Ohio State's incredible as well. Can they kind of buck this trend? Can they be the team that moves forward? If you were to ask me, I would say yes. I think they upgraded at 2 of the positions that they changed. I think the offensive coordinator position was one that just needed to change. It needed to be Ryan Day as the overarching head coach, and then someone calling plays, fully focusing on that. And they got one of the best in the business in Chip Kelly. And I think, frankly, it was an upgrade from the guy that they first hired, and Bill O'Brien, in my mind. So I think they did a fine job there. I also think going from Kyle McCord to Will Howard is an upgrade. Will Howard is still a little bit of an unknown, especially when you're playing, the Big Ten teams that he's going to play week after week. But I think he's going to be fine. I think he's going to be a really good quarterback. He knows how to execute an offense. I think his running ability is going to be a huge part of this offense and definitely kind of open them up a little bit more. So I think they upgraded at both those spots. So doesn't necessarily matter that they only have 2 guys coming back. I'm not necessarily super sold on that idea. I think the 2 that they have coming back in Ryan Day and Jim Knowles in particular are just incredible. So I'm not necessarily too worried. If you are, really subscribed to this idea, your 6 national champions are the people that are the 6 teams that will your national champion will come from these 6 teams. I couldn't figure out how I wanted to phrase that. UGA, Texas, Oregon, Florida State, Missouri, or Ole Miss. Those are your teams. If you really believe in this and you want to follow the last decade of evidence that has proven that, pick one of those teams and keep it moving. Now, last year it was 4 out of 4 for Michigan. The year before that, it was 3 out of 4 for UGA, with only Dan Lanning moving on. So it's going to be a really interesting thing to watch in a landscape that is always changing with roster moves and coaching moves and everything in between. Knowing that continuity is the one that wins out makes me pretty happy. I got to be totally honest with you. So I think it's going to be really interesting to watch this. Ohio State is still going to be in the top of the Big Ten. They're still going to be the class of college football, but they have a couple of changes, and if those don't hit, then it could spell disaster for the Buckeyes. But we'll take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to keep talking about the Big Ten here for a second. We're going to talk about Iowa and USC and how Tim Lester, the new OC at Iowa, and DeAnton Lynn, the new DC at USC, might just have a lot of power in their hands if they can make things happen in year one. So we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about a trend that has happened over the last decade where if you return at least 3 of the 4 between your head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and quarterback, you got a shot to win the national title, and Ohio State does not. So one of the very, very big favorites to win the national title might be on the wrong side of history on that one. But let's jump into a couple of coordinators in the Big Ten and how they could totally switch up what the Big Ten is going to be this upcoming year. When we get into the Big Ten, I feel like the conversation always starts with Ohio State and Oregon, and then you get to Michigan and Penn State. Those are the teams that everyone's focused on going into the season, and frankly for good reason. Those are the 4 best teams in the conference, and I feel very confident saying that. Those are the teams that are the class of this conference, and they will be at least until further notice. But these 2 guys have an ability to kind of buck that trend, to kind of change the way that people look at their teams in particular, but kind of just the Big Ten overall. So I want to get into this a little bit, and I think the biggest thing with this, the most interesting thing in my mind, is there's so many unknowns every single year when you go into a football season. You don't know, who's going to perform. You don't know who's not going to perform, which side of the ball for either team is going to perform. One of the things we've known for the last, better part of a decade has been Iowa is always going to put a really good defensive product on the field, and Lincoln Riley is always going to put a really good offensive product on the field. That's just something that has become very, very comfortable over the last couple of years. Now, Lincoln Riley obviously didn't have the year that he wanted a year ago offensively, but he's going to have a good offensive team. That's just, without question, that's what's going to happen year over year for him. So he brought in a guy called DeAnton Lynn who can totally change the other side of the ball and make this a complete team, not just a team that has to straight up outscore people. And on the Iowa side of things, you have a guy that might just be able to put points on the board, which is something that sounds like a foreign concept to Iowa fans at this point, but I promise you that is possible at that school, and Tim Lester has a really, really good way of going about it. I have a ton of confidence in this guy to at least elevate this offense. It doesn't necessarily take too much to elevate it, to be totally honest, but the reality is I think he has just tons of experience, tons of ability to get to players and get the best out of them, and I think the biggest thing with him is he's been all over the place. He's been at a number of Power 4 schools as an offensive coordinator, was a head coach at Western Michigan for quite some time, and then went to the Packers last season as a senior analyst. And that's kind of where the story kind of starts with him in Iowa, where He's coming into Iowa, and Liddell Bates, the former Iowa running back and now running back coach at Iowa, had, glowing things to say about him since he's walked in the building, said he's just an incredible guy to be around, very, very strong football mind. But he said something very interesting when talking about their offense. He said, we're running the Packer system, we're running the Shanahan system, and that's going to be a very interesting system for Iowa to run, because as we've all become very, very comfortable with Iowa, it's not going to be very diverse. They're not going to do a lot of things. It's going to be a lot of jumbo sets, a lot of 2 tight end sets, a lot of running inside zone, outside zone. They're not going to play around with things too much. That is totally going to change. If this is really what they're going to run, it's totally going to change overnight pretty much. And the biggest way it's going to change is pre-snap motion. The biggest thing that Iowa has not done in the past years, and one of the best monikers for do you have a good offense or do you not, is how much motion do you use pre-snap. It's a great way to get defenses on their heels, get them confused. You can run, one set and then flip to an entirely different play all in one motion. So it's a huge thing that, more and more teams are trying to unlock. And when you look around the college football landscape, the guys that utilize it the most, Texas, I believe Michigan was number 1 or number 2, I believe, in college football last year using it, and that opened tons of running lanes. So it's not necessarily about moving wide receivers all over the place and throwing the ball all over the field. It's just about creating space. It's just about, moving that safety a yard or 2 outside the box, or moving that linebacker out to guard a running back when you move him outside the backfield. So it's just about opening different lanes, and I think that's really what they're going to do. They're going to be a running team. They're going to be a team that still tries to, live by what they live by, which is running the ball, trying to push teams, and kind of just impose their will on teams. That is a good way to go forward. The only way you can really do that, though, is if you're having motion in pre-snap, if you're getting people on their heels, if you're opening up running lanes with the linebacker leaving the box or the safety leaving the box, whatever that looks like. You need motion to make all of this happen. So I don't necessarily think it's going to be an entire rebuild at Iowa. I don't think they're going to entirely reinvent this offense. But if you add just that one little new thing, that adding motion almost every play, or maybe even just, let's say 40% of the time, which last year it was about 23% of the time, which was 12th in the Big 12, 112th nationally. If they move up to maybe, 35% of the time, 40% of the time, I can almost promise you this is going to be a more potent offense. They're going to be able to have bigger running lanes, be able to, get guys to the second level where it used to be just, 3 yards in a cloud of dust. And that's all well and fun, but the reality is you're not going to score a lot of points doing that. So it'll be really interesting to watch this. I think they are not going to have to out-talent teams. They're not going to have to, be the fastest or the strongest or the biggest team on the field. They're just going to have to use their moments and use motion and find open running lanes, and at the end of the day, still be Iowa, still be hard-nosed, still do their thing, but be able to kind of just open up running lanes for these really good running backs and this really good running game in general that you have. So I really like what Tim Lester's doing. I think just add that one little thing, and this offense really could turn up a ton. And then you have DeAnton Lynn over at USC. He's got a tougher job in a ton of different ways. And I understand that Tim Lester is coming from a situation where they were not scoring any points before he showed up, at least on the offensive side of the ball. So he obviously has a big-time job ahead of him. But I think when you look at the USC defense right now, it is not near where it needs to be for them to be able to compete. From a roster perspective, from a toughness perspective, from the way that they approach practice, they're just not there. That's just the plain truth about it. They're a very good team, and they do have talented players on that team, but they don't have enough of them, and they don't have enough depth. They don't have enough of a lot of things, frankly, over there on the defensive side. But the reality is, you don't necessarily have to be special this year if you're the USC defense. You know you're going to score points. Lincoln Riley has very rarely not scoring points in basically every single game. You need to just play with a certain edge that they haven't played with in the past. You need to walk onto that field with a little bit of anger, with some steam coming out of your ears. Whatever makes those boys play just a little bit harder on Saturdays, I think that might just be all you need to make the plays that are necessary. Because, as I said, they have a couple of players that can make plays, that are talented, that are really elite players. I mean, Bear Alexander, I think, is a fantastic NFL-level defensive tackle. So you have the ability. You have some guys out there that can make some plays, but you need a collective. And you need to just make sure that if you're playing fast, if you're playing physical, if you're, flying downhill, doing all the little things right, I think you have the ability to just be opportunistic, to just make a couple of plays every single game, maybe have a pick or two, maybe, get a forced fumble, get a sack on a long third down, whatever it looks like, just to get the ball back in the hands of your offense and then let them go to work. So it is going to be an entire rebuild if they want to be a national title contender. If they want to, win 17 games in a year and win a national title and Lincoln Riley finally get to the top of the mountaintop, it's going to take some time. But that doesn't mean they can't be a good team this year. That doesn't mean they can't take big-time steps forward this year and be opportunistic and take a couple of picks away and be a big turnover team and just get the ball in the hands of their offense. And then if that happens, Lincoln Riley's going to score points, and USC is going to be a tough team to deal with. So a year ago, Iowa was fewest yards per game offensively with about 230 total yards per game. That's insane. For a team that is in a Big Ten, a power conference that has the ability that Iowa has to recruit some of the people that they can, that should never be the case. That's just the reality. It's been that way for quite some time, probably too long, but Tim Lester's coming in to fix that. And then USC only outpaced Oklahoma State, Colorado, Vandy, Stanford in terms of not giving up, yards given up by a defense. That's not the group they want to be in. They want to be in the Texas, in the Georgia, Alabama, that group. And it's going to take some time to get there, but let's just say the Iowa offense moves up 40 spots in the total offense or in the yards per game category. And the same thing happened with the USC defense. There's a reality where they can win a lot of games. There's a reality where USC could walk into Ann Arbor and win that game. If you can play defense, if you can slow down that run game, you might have a chance to pull that off. If Iowa can score some points with some of these teams like Ohio State and Penn State and Michigan, they can win some of those games. I know it might sound crazy given what they have been in the past, but these teams don't need, massive leaps. They don't need to be a top 10, 15 offense or defense in the entire country. They just need to be better. And they need to start building. And if they can be, a little bit better, or maybe even a lot better, I think Iowa has a chance to be a lot better on offense. And if that happens, this is a really interesting team that could make some noise against even the best of the teams in the Big Ten. So I think these two guys, when you look across the landscape of college football, there's a ton of very, very important coordinators going into this year. Nick Sheridan and Kane Womack at Alabama. We talked about the Penn State guys, Andy Kotelnicki and Tom Allen. But these two guys in particular are two I'm watching very closely because they're really just filling a massive hole in a team, and if they can fill it even a little bit this year, just plug it 40%, plug it 30%, you have the ability to be more potent, to score some points, or to hold some teams from scoring some points, and actually be contenders in this league. And it could totally kickstart what they're going to do in the future, especially for DeAnton Lynn, where if you put together a really good defense and if you, have a couple of takeaways and make some big plays and have some of those, highlight moments, kids are going to start flowing into that school. I can almost promise you that. Really talented defensive players will definitely want to play for that guy, and it could be a huge year for both these teams. Maybe they don't, win the Big Ten or totally flip it on its head this year, but going forward, those are two of the most important guys in this conference and could define this conference going forward. So it'll be fascinating to watch that, but we're going to take our third break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some Group of 5 Cinderellas. We've been through all of the Power 4 conferences, but wanted to give some love to the Group of 5 guys. So I got 5 guys for you going through every single Group of 5 conference, give you one team per just to keep an eye out on for maybe a playoff berth at the end of the year. So stick around and we'll be right back with that.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Tim Lester and DeAnton Lynn and how they might just be two of the most important people in the Big Ten this year. If they hit, then a lot of things happen in the Big Ten that we might not be expecting right now. But let's get into Cinderella Watch. We're going to get over to the group of 5 now. We've done all the Power 4 teams. We did SEC, we had A&M and OU, although I've said before I think I would take back the A&M one, slide in Kentucky just because A&M's win total being 8.5 feels a little bit too high for them to be a Cinderella, but that's beside the point. We also had Big Ten, Nebraska and Wisconsin right in there. Big 12, I had Texas Tech and UCF. Too many people were picking Iowa State, so I decided to go in another direction. And then the ACC, we had Georgia Tech and SMU. So if you want to check out those segments, they're up on the YouTube page as always. But let's get to the group of 5. I wanted to spread some love there. They absolutely deserve some. One team is going to make it to the playoff. Now, it might not be from this group that I'm about to break down here, but it definitely could be. There are some really, really talented teams that might just be lurking just under the surface in some of these conferences. So let's start to break this down. A lot of these teams, obviously, are going to be towards the top of their conference. They're not necessarily going to be the Cinderellas that we broke down in the SEC or the Big Ten or the Big 12 or the ACC where you're sitting somewhere in the middle. They got to be somewhere towards the top because you got to somehow make that run into the playoff, and it's very rare when you see a team that has a 5.5 win total in a group of 5 conference make that run up to the top. So these are probably, second or third betting favorites in their conference, but there is a margin between them and the team that's ahead of them. So let's start with the American and let's get into Tulane because this team has a level of talent that not many group of 5 teams have. They have some guys on this team that really could be playing in the Power 4 conferences tomorrow if they really wanted to. Ty Thompson is a really, really fantastic quarterback, a guy I'm really high on. He came over from Oregon after just not really finding his footing there. Wanted to be a starter after Bo Nix left. They went out and got Dylan Gabriel. He found his way over to New Orleans, and I just think he's going to be a really good player. I think he's playing with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder now, which doesn't hurt anyone. I think he has an ability to really, really take this team to the heights they've kind of become comfortable with over there at Tulane. So I definitely think this is going to be a really good team. I think they could be the team that wins the American and goes into the college football playoff because the American is likely where we're going to get that team from, at least if I had to bet right now. That's the conference that I would lean to. And then you also add Mario Williams and Shaz Preston on the outside. Those two guys are just incredible. Two, I believe, 5 stars when they were coming out of high school, maybe high 4 stars. But Mario Williams was really good at Oklahoma and USC before finding his way over to Tulane. Shaz Preston was one of the top recruits at wide receiver before going to Bama, and then just not necessarily catching on the way he wants. And you add all of that to Yulkeith Brown, who is a fantastic player, might be the best wide receiver of the bunch. So it's going to be incredible what they can do in the pass game. I think they have a ton of talent on that offensive side of the ball, and they also added some on the back end of the defense. Jalen Geiger coming in from Kentucky is absolutely huge. He started a couple of games for the Wildcats a year ago, so a very, very good player there. And then Lou Tillery is a very, very fantastic player from ULM. He came in on the back end as well. I think he's going to be a huge player for them going forward. John Sumrall comes in as a new head coach. He was the head coach for 2 years at Troy. He wins. There's no two ways about that. The dude just walks into different situations and wins football games. So I don't think they need to worry about that too much. They are going to be a team that needs to be worried about. But let's move on over to the MAC. And a team that I love going into the season is Miami of Ohio. I think they have a ton of ability, a ton of chance to get into the playoff and maybe play spoiler once they get there. I think they have one of the best quarterbacks in the group of 5. When you talk about Brett Gabbert, the brother of Blaine, a very, very good college player in his own right. But this dude is very, very comfortable in this offense. He's been running it for quite some time, can execute at just a ridiculously high level. And I think going into this year, you got to have a ton of confidence for this team. The highest win total in the MAC is 8.5 at Toledo. This one is 7.5, so not necessarily the biggest gap between these two teams by any means. But this is a team that I think could just dominate this conference, if I'm being totally honest. I think they could go 12-1. In fact, I saw someone on the Andy Staples show kind of present that question to him, and I think that would be a playoff team. So it'll be fascinating to watch this team unfold. They're 9th in the country in returning production, which is 2nd in the group of 5, only behind Kennesaw State. And if you know anything about Kennesaw State, they're just making their jump into the FBS. So don't necessarily expect a huge year from the Owls, but would be incredible to watch, that's for sure. But they went 11-3 a year ago, the best year they've had since 2003 up there. Returned 12 starters, including 9 all-MAC selections from a year ago. So this is going to be a really good team, and they're going to be one of the teams that definitely has to be worried about in the MAC. And I think they might just be the team that we see in the playoff at the end of the year. But let's move over to Conference USA, and Western Kentucky is the team that I'm watching very closely because there's a couple of different things happening over at Western Kentucky that are really fascinating. And the number one in my mind is the quarterback position. Caden Veltkamp came in later in the season and just did really, really well. He had an incredible performance in the bowl game, had an MVP performance. I think he threw for 5 touchdowns in that game. So just did incredible things in that game. And this team is dangerous with him at quarterback. But TJ Finley just transferred in. TJ Finley has been at Auburn, LSU, Texas State a year ago, where he had a fantastic year before finding his way to Western Kentucky, and he's probably the more talented guy, on paper at least. But I don't know. Caden Veltkamp had really shown that he is a leader. He is someone that can really run this offense very effectively, and I'd bet on him to be the starter week 1, but it'll be a very interesting thing to watch there. But Western Kentucky is a team that they're just going to score. They're going to score a ton, and they're going to score very often, and it's going to be really tough to stop them. That's why Malachi Corley was such a high draft pick, because they were going his direction very, very often. I'll put it that way. I think it's going to be tons of 10 personnel, which is 1 running back, 0 tight end, so 4 wide receivers out on the field. They're going to spread you out. They're going to do a ton of different things in the pass game and just make it really tough for you to slow them down. And then they got 2 big-time transfers from the SEC on the defensive side of the ball. They got DeMarco Williams, who came in from Ole Miss, and then Kent Robinson came in from Texas A&M. So 2 huge additions on the back end just to kind of give a blanket over the back end of this defense. So huge for them, definitely elevated their ability on that defensive side of the ball, and they're going to score some points. So I think they're going to be a team that not only could get into the playoff, but maybe, just maybe, be the spoiler that gets to the second round, because they're going to be able to score with really anyone in the entire country. But then let's move over to the Sun Belt, and let's get into the App State Mountaineers. Joey Aguilar is one of the best quarterbacks in the group of 5. He might be the best quarterback in the group of 5, frankly. He set a ton of school records a year ago in 2023. They also added Charles Wright from Texas in the portal at that position, so they look like they're going to be okay going forward, even if Joey Aguilar goes down with an injury, which hopefully he doesn't, obviously. But if he does, Charles Wright, I think, is a very talented kid that can step right in and really play good football. Then you have Kanye Roberts at running back, a very good running back. I think a guy that could carry their offense at times this year. So really, really like that kid. I think he's going to have a huge year for them. Caden Robinson and Christian Horn is a fantastic duo in the passing game. Both of them are just going to be really, really incredible for this team. I believe they were the receiving leaders from a year ago. So returning those guys, returning your quarterback definitely helps a lot. It's going to be a really potent offense. The defense is definitely going to be really solid. You have Avarian Cole, you have Jordan Favors, Ethan Johnson on the back end, all really good players. You had Santana Hooper and Nate Johnson that'll hold it down on the front end. So very, very talented players all across this defense. And this might be the outright best team when you go into the group of 5, where you look at top to bottom, they feel like they have a ton of really talented players, but also players that have been there for a while and have some experience. So I really like this App State team. Would not be surprised at all if they dominated the Sun Belt this year and found their way into the playoff. But finally, the Mountain West team, I got UNLV. I think you all understand I very much like UNLV. I think the offense they run is just incredibly fun, and it's going to score a ton of points. That's absolutely without question. Ricky White was the receiving leader in college football from a year ago. I expect him to do that again, if I'm being totally honest. Brennan Marion has been running one of the best, most interesting offenses in the country the last couple of years. and I expect him to do more of the same in 2024. Matt Sluka coming in from High Point to be their quarterback after Jade Mayava found his way to Georgia and then found his way to USC. Kind of a weird portal cycle for him. Was a really interesting kind of turn of events, but I think Sluka is going to be more than fine. Is kind of that dual threat guy that you need at that position over there at UNLV. And then they added Casey Kane through the portal to go along with Ricky White at the wide receiver position. So they're going to be more than fine. Plenty of talent on the offensive side of the ball. The back end of that defense might have gotten the biggest win from the portal out of everyone, though. When you add guys like Jalen Catalon and Tony Grimes, you're doing something right. Jalen Catalon coming over from Texas, the dude's a really good player. He just got to stay on the field. That's the only question about this kid is he going to be healthy enough to stay on the field the amount that you need him to? If he can do that, he's going to be great. There's no two ways about that. Tony Grimes was a 5-star, I believe the number 1 cornerback in the country coming out of high school. So the ability is definitely there on the defensive side of the ball as well. I think this team is going to be able to just really just score with any team in the country and not necessarily have to play incredible defense week in and week out to win games. But also when you have 2 guys on the back end like Jalen Catalon, who is going to lay a lick if you get to him, and then Tony Grimes, who's a very, very good coverage corner, you'll be okay. I feel very confident about this team. I really love these teams. I think there's a lot to love about the group of 5 this year with a ton of really good teams out there. Boise State's another that's really, really interesting, but I wanted to go at least a little bit down the path instead of just picking the favorite in every conference. I might have picked the second favorite if I'm being totally honest, but I think these are the teams that I'm watching very closely. Tulane and UNLV are the ones that have a little special place in my heart. Just really like those teams, really like those rosters. But I think the team that has the best chance to pull this off is probably App State. That's probably the best team of the bunch, the team that has a ton of returning production as well as experience. So I feel very confident in App State, at least to put together a really good season and be in that conversation for the playoff spot. So it'll be interesting to see that unfold. The first time the group of 5 has a guaranteed spot, and there are plenty of people that will have a big time say in what happens with that spot. So it'll be interesting to follow, but we'll take our final break here. When we come back, we're going to do a little bit of a new segment called Tommy's Guys of 2024. We'll break down some of the guys that I'm following very closely that I'm betting on to have just huge years for their team, or maybe I just like them. I just think they're a really cool person, or I think they're a really fun player to watch. So we'll break all that down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the teams to watch as Cinderellas possibly for the group of 5 teams that could make their way into the playoff this year and maybe, just maybe, make it through that first round, but it would be a very tall order to do that. But let's get into the final segment here. I wanted to get closer to, as we get closer to the season, I wanted to break down some of the players that I'm watching very closely, maybe some players that if they don't play well, you can come back and make fun of me. It's always fun for all of us. So we'll break that down. We have a couple of guys that I really, really like going into this season. Some are a little bit off the beaten path. Some you might very much know very well, but I want to break down these guys. And I think the guy I want to start with is someone we talked about yesterday. Haynes King is a guy that I think it's not nearly the respect that he deserves for what he did a season ago at Tech. I talked about him a bit yesterday. I think I can't be higher on this kid. The college football world gets so caught up in arm strength and arm talent and what's your 40 time and how tall are you and how much do you weigh? Are you the prototypical quarterback that they forget it's kind of just about making the plays. It's about putting the ball in your receiver's hands. It's about making sure you don't get yourself into bad situations. And there are very few people in the country that do that better than Haynes King. I think his ability to be kind of a dual threat guy in that offense has really helped them open up a totally different part of this offense that a lot of Tech fans in the past, I'm sure, didn't even think existed, if I'm being totally honest. Bringing in Buster Faulkner is absolutely huge at that offensive coordinator position because it felt like he was made to call plays for Haynes King. Everything just feels very comfortable on both sides, where Buster Faulkner is calling something he's totally confident in. Haynes King is, when it's called, he feels totally confident that he can deliver it, and he delivers it way more times than he doesn't. So I think his ability is just incredible. His running ability is one of those things that it kind of reminds me of Stetson Bennett in a way where he gets on the field, you don't expect him to be able to hurt you with his legs, and then all of a sudden he's 30 yards downfield. So I think he's going to be a very, very dangerous player in a number of ways. That was a huge reason why they were third in the ACC in total yards. They were the only team in the ACC from a year ago that averaged over 200 yards passing and rushing. So they can do things a lot of different ways, and this offense is getting rolling, and Haynes King is the reason for it. He's just been absolutely incredible. He's not going to play, in the NBA, or he's definitely not going to play in the NBA. I can say that pretty confidently, but he probably won't play in the NFL. He probably won't be a starting quarterback or do anything incredible at the combine or all of that type of stuff, but he's going to make plays. He's going to win you football games, and he's going to be a really fun guy to watch. So I really like him. I think even if he pulls up his game even a little bit more, I talked about it yesterday. I think Georgia Tech could be a team that has to be worried about in the ACC this year, and this is the guy that really makes me feel as confident in that take as I am. But it definitely will be someone that I feel like at some point this year you'll turn on your TV and see Haynes King just dicing up Miami or dicing up Florida State or dicing up one of these teams and just be a little bit shocked. I'll just put it that way. But let's keep it moving here. And I want to talk about Cam Cook here for a second. Cam Cook has been... I think he would be all over the place right now. Everyone would be talking about this kid, but he did get injured towards the end of last year and wasn't able to play out the end of the season and didn't necessarily get as much run as probably they would have liked to give him, if I'm being totally honest, looking back on it. But they definitely have the ability to have a huge run game, and it's this guy right here. That's the reason. He is shifty, but still physical. He's kind of... I don't want to make this comparison because it's very lofty for this kid, but when I'm watching him play, it's kind of a Bijan Robinson type player where he's going to juke you out, but then if you do have to, meet him with a stiff arm, it's not going to be great for you either. So I think he has an ability to just be an incredible running back. When you look at TCU, they need an elite run game. That's the way Sonny Dykes works. That's the way every elite offense around college football works is if you don't have a run game, you don't have a pass game, and you don't have an offense. That's just the reality. In 2022, they had Kendre Miller. They had Mario DiMercado, very, very talented duo in the backfield. Last year, Amani Bailey did an incredible job, but you likely need more than one guy. I think Cam Cook is going to be the guy leading the way. I think Trey Sanders could be a great supplemental piece as well, although he hasn't quite hit the strides that TCU was hoping when he came over from Alabama, I believe. A very talented kid nonetheless, but I think Cam Cook is going to be a huge piece to the puzzle for them. I think he's going to do just incredible things in the run game and in the pass game. I think he has an ability to catch the ball out of the backfield that is going to be really, really utilized. He's a very, very strong, very elusive back that can really just do a lot of different things. So TCU could not be higher on him. I could not be higher on him. One of the guys that I follow very closely in the college football world, Liam Blutman over there at the Unnecessary Roughness podcast, could not be higher on him. So that made me feel a little bit more confident in this take over here. But let's move on and let's talk about Matthew Golden, a very, very interesting player. He was one of the a million wide receiver transfers that came into Texas this offseason. He came in with Isaiah Bond and Silas Golden. He's coming in from Houston, and he is a fantastic player. When I look at this wide receiver room for Texas, I think there's a ton of remarkable players. The talent level is not lacking by any means, but there are two guys, in my opinion, that can totally transform what this wide receiver room can be, and it's Matthew Golden and it's Ryan Wingo, a freshman that's coming in that has really turned some heads and might be the starter, frankly, when you come to week one. Those are the A.D. Mitchells of this group, the guy that can, do the things that maybe some of these other speedsters just can't do quite as well, and they totally opens up the offense. I mean, you remember, in 2022, it was a lot of Xavier Worthy, and it made it a little bit easier to game plan for. But when you add someone like A.D. Mitchell, who is dangerous all over the field, it makes it a little bit easier to kind of open up some passing lanes for the other guys. And I think Matthew Golden's going to be that guy. Also, one of the big things for Matthew Golden is he lives where Quinn Ewers lives, which is mid-range passing. When Quinn Ewers is passing between 10 and 20 yards, you can almost guarantee it's going to be completed. The guy is absolutely money. Now, down the field passes are a little bit tougher, and hopefully he takes a step forward there. But the reality is when he's in between 10 and 20 yards, it's about 90% completion. It's absolutely insane what he can do, and that's exactly where Matthew Golden's going to be in this offense. He's going to be right in the middle playing those, third down, just hitches 10 yards up the field, maybe a little dig route, 15 yards up the field, whatever that looks like. He's going to be that guy. He's going to be that intermediate route guy. So Isaiah Bond, Jonte Cook, Silas Bolden are going to make the big highlight plays. They're going to make the downfield plays, the big catch, the 80-yard touchdown, the screen that goes 75 yards after the catch, whatever that looks like. They're going to make those plays. Matthew Golden is going to make pretty much everyone else. He's going to make a ton of big-time plays for this team. Frankly, I would not be surprised if he led them in receiving this upcoming year because I think he's going to get a ton of targets. I think he's going to get a ton of work, and he might be the second or third guy in a progression, but when the other two guys are running, maybe screens or drags or just shorter to the line of scrimmage routes, they could be covered at least earlier on in that process, and then you find your way to Matthew Golden. He's very sure-handed. I think of this group, Matthew Golden's the one that can totally transform this offense. So very much like him, but let's move over to the defensive side of the ball and talk about Jalen Walker. This is a guy that I just love. He reminds me so much of Trayvon Walker, where it's just an absolute pure athlete coming off the edge. Not necessarily the most technically proficient pass rusher in the world, but when you're just looking for pure athleticism, he is very towards the top of the list when we talk about college football players. He can do just incredible things. I think he's going to have a huge year for probably 20 different reasons, but the number one in my mind is he's not even the best edge rusher on this team. Michael Williams is going to be the guy that gets a ton of attention, gets some doubles from some guards, and definitely pulls offensive linemen that direction. That means Jalen Walker is going to have some free pass to the quarterback, or at least have some one-on-ones where he can just feast on right tackles. So I'm very excited to see what he can do. I absolutely love his energy. He's someone that you can put on a money down type unit where it's a third and long and you need a sack. He will definitely be in on those plays. But also you can play him in the middle of the field as a middle linebacker. You can drop him back in coverage. You can play him just in the flat. You can play him in coverage. You could have him run with a running back. He can do things on the football field that not everyone can do. And it's really, really a special thing to watch. And I think he might not necessarily be a guy that totally lights up the stat sheet at the end of the day, but he is going to be a guy that shows you his versatility. He is going to be a guy that makes a number of plays. He could be even a double-digit sack guy, although I think that might be a little bit lofty, but the reality is he's going to make a ton of plays, and he's going to make them in ways that you might not even notice because he's playing such good coverage or because he locked it down so quickly that they didn't even run the play that direction. So he's going to do things that might go a little bit under notice, might go a little bit under the radar with Michael Williams and Malachi Starks and all the guys on that defense kind of stealing the spotlight, but he's going to get his. I almost promise you that. He's a really, really remarkable player, and I think UGA usually morphs these type of players into just absolute beasts. I think this is the year that it happens for Jalen Walker. And then finally, Davison Igbinosun is a very fascinating player to me. He came over to Ohio State, I believe, in the 2023 offseason from Ole Miss, finally found his place to seem like the place that he wanted to be all along. That was kind of the talk around him when he did transfer over, that he kind of wanted to be at Ohio State from the get-go, but just didn't work out in the short term for his high school recruitment. But this is kind of the Jalen Walker problem all over again, if I'm being totally honest. When we talk about this back end, it's all about Denzel Burke, Caleb Downs, Lathan Ransom, but Igbinosun is going to be the player that defines this back end in my mind. They have plenty of really talented players, and I think Igbinosun doesn't necessarily need to be an absolute lockdown guy to be very successful or for this defense to be successful, but the reality is he can be a lockdown guy, and if he is, there's no defense that's going to come close to this Ohio State defense. If he has the ability to, he's usually going to get the wide receiver 2 on the team because you have a guy like Denzel Burke. They're going to avoid him at all costs, and they're going to try to throw your direction. You're going to get plenty of opportunities to make some plays, and this guy's really tough, especially at the line of scrimmage. He's someone that's going to play press coverage and is going to kick you off your line pretty quickly and definitely mess up your route very early on. So I think this is a very interesting player where you have all this talent around him where, you know, Denzel Burke and Caleb Downs, they're first-round picks. There's no two doubts in my mind about that. Lathan Ransom is going to be a high-round draft pick. Davison Igbinosun definitely could be and probably will be with the way that I'm expecting him to play this year. He is long, he is athletic, he can play the pass and the run, can do just so many incredible things on the football field, and he's the 4th best guy in this group. So I think when you look at this group, if the cornerback 2 in Igbinosun can be attacked, then they're going to, you know, be able to be exposed from time to time, and it could lead to a loss or two on Ohio State's schedule because the margins are so thin. If you have a guy over there that's just locking down everyone that's in front of him, no one's going to be able to pass against this team, at least not consistently. So it'll be fascinating to watch. I really like this kid. I think he's going to have a huge year, and I think essentially, I think when you show up to play Ohio State, just plan to run the ball a lot and hope that works, although it might not work there because they have a really good defensive line. But Ohio State's just absolutely loaded. But I think on the defensive side of the ball, if Davison Igbinosun plays A+ or even B+ football, it's going to be scary how good this defense is. But I really do like all those guys. I think all of them have a ton to gain from this upcoming year, and maybe, you know, won't be NFL players. Maybe you won't light the world on fire. Haynes King is probably the best example of this person, but they're going to play really good college football. And those are the guys that I like. I'm not necessarily super concerned about what they're going to do 5 years from now in the NFL. I'm more concerned about what they're going to do this year for their team in college football. So love these guys. I think they're going to be pretty much household names by the end of the year. Cam Cook is the one that I think is just going to explode this year. So very, very excited about all of those guys. We'll probably continue doing this. I think it's kind of a fun way for you guys to get an idea of who the players I'm watching, who are the teams that I'm watching very closely. I've made it very clear that Kentucky is one of my loves going into this season. But other than that, I will definitely continue to revisit this and give you guys an idea of who are the players maybe a little bit off the beaten path that I absolutely love going into this season and really expect to succeed. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We have incredible people doing just incredible work across every single sport you could possibly want. So definitely come on over and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys on Monday.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.